Thank you for coming this evening. My name is Susan Burgess. I'm the Director of Latin American Studies and the Chair of the Latin Language Literature Department here at the University of the Pacific. And I welcome all of you. I want to give particular recognition and thanks to our sponsors this evening, Pacific Arts and Lectures, the Latino Community Outreach Program, Ethnic Studies, the English Department, the Humanities Center, Beyond Our Gates, and Latin American Studies. I want to welcome, of course, all of the students, the teachers, the staff, school officials, administrators, both from our Stockton High School, elementary schools who are here, and I think Manteca Unified, and Stanislaus County Board of Education, and Stockton, all of the school districts. I think we have people here in addition to our Pacific students. I'd also like to recognize Dean Frank, College of the Pacific, and Provost Maria Pallavicini. So before we start, the first thing I just want to say is I really love Stockton. And I really love the Central Valley. And I'm really glad that I live here. And one of the things for me about reading Matt's books, this is Matt De La Pena, by the way, our Christine author, and this guy. So when I first read Matt's books, what struck me was how Stockton they were. Now, the first book I read was actually set it was Mexican Whitepoint, a national city in San Diego, but it felt very Stockton to me. And the second book I read was, in fact, it's set right here in Stockton. And in fact, do we have the word here? Maria, would you do me a favor? In the briefcase right there, yeah, could you open it up? I think there's a copy of the book. I want to show you that book. This is set in Stockton. Yeah, this is the one. Thank you. So, you're very Stockton because one of the things that I love about Stockton, about bringing up my family here, is there is no ethnic majority in this town. Almost any language that you can imagine is spoken by somebody in this town. And that's true for the whole Central Valley. And it's true in Matt's books. There's an incredible mix. You have to say Mexican white boy, but in fact the characters aren't just Mexican and white. The characters are all over the board. We were here, it's so Stockton. You have Mexican, you have African American, you have Asian characters, you've got the blonde surfer guy, and you've got everybody in this book. Well, that's important. I think that's life. That's the way it should be. And this is, I think, the gift of living where we live and studying where all of you are studying. So, how did we come to have Matt here to begin with? Well, Matt is our alum. He graduated from Pacific in 1996. And I'll let you tell his story. We can tell you about that. But what I'll tell you is, back in spring of 2012, the New York Times wrote an article about a book. In fact, a few books that were being banned in the Tucson School District in Arizona. The book that was featured happened to be Mexican White Boy, because it just so happens that a class there had raised enough money with their bake sales and this and that to bring Matt from New York to Arizona. And he got there just in time to find his books being removed from the classroom. Now, if you go and read the book that's being removed, Mexican White Boy, you think, why would you have this book banned? In this book to be banned, and there's nothing in the book that should be banned, but somehow some officials in Tucson got it into their head that it was anti-white because it had characters who were not white, and it was being taught in a Mexican-American studies program. Well, some of us here at Pacific, we paid special attention to that because a lot of my colleagues, I did not have the privilege of having Matt in class because he did not have the sense to study Spanish with me. Nonetheless, he did have the sense to study English with some of my esteemed colleagues. And so when an article comes out in the New York Times, your alum is featured in the article, you read it and you're interested. But when we looked at Mexican White Boy and we saw it being banned, it really got under our skin. And then we read, most of us took a moment to stop and read the book, and we got even more upset. So several people pulled together, including the College of the Pacific Dean, the Dean of the School of Education, President Ibeck, Inez Reese-Houston in Latino Community Outreach, Latin American Studies Program, our Language Department, the English Department, and we started fundraising, and we managed to put a copy of Mexican White Boy in the hands of every freshman in Stockton Unified in fall 2020. So, take that, Tucson. So, Matt today went over to speak at State High School, and I think about a third of those kids raised their hand and they had read Mexican White Boy. I'm going to take some credit for having those over that. Inez, where are you? There's Inez. Inez and her students hand delivered all of those books. And by the way, a few of our basketball players also went over to Franklin High School at the time and delivered some of Matt's books there. Matt can explain to you why basketball players might do that. So that's the beginning of all of this. Yesterday, Matt arrived and I was driving him to his hotel and I was trying to avoid traffic, driving around in circles down Pershing and Brookside, and we turned the corner right by State High School, and the students were just getting out of class, and Matt said, "Oh, this is the place, this is it," and he points to the levee, and I said, "This is what?" I said, "It's We Were Here, this book, this is the levee." And I looked at, "This is the levee?" He said, "Yeah, this is what I had in mind when I wrote We Were Here." And I'm not even going to read the entire, first paragraph because it would be too long, but I'm going to read you this much. The first two sentences of the book. Here's the thing. I was probably going to write a book when I got older anyways, about what it's like growing up on the levee in Stockton. That's how it starts. And it's Levee by State High School, so that's how much this book hits home. And this is a book that, by the way, has everybody's in it. The Long Surfer guy, the Asian guy, Mexican guy, the African American guy. This is, there are a few things that are missing. I think we had a Filipino in here, and you might have been missing, a few of ours missing. No, that's pretty darn good. So Matt's here tonight. I'm not going to keep talking anymore. I just wanted to let you to contextualize a little bit about how close Matt is. So he's not just a alum who happens to be, maybe a New York writer now on the, bestseller list of people written up in the New York Times. He's a really special alum who's really tied to us and very much part of who we are as a university and as a community. So that's the end of what I'm going to say. I'll hand a couple of mics over to Matt de la Peña and his father, Al de la Peña.
Años después, frente al pelotón de fusilamiento, el coronel Aureliano Buendía había recordado aquella tarde remota en que su padre lo llevó a conocer el hielo. One person left. Does anybody know that as well? Raise your hand. What is it? Hundreds of years of solitude in Spanish. So, really quick before I start, I wanted to have you guys just take a quick peek around. This is kind of a packed house right now. And anytime I'm in front of a lot of people like this, I am reminded of my first ever event, which occurred in Albany, New York. So I have to take you guys through this. So when my first book got published, 2005, I moved to New York, and I was so excited because I had never met an author before, and I was so excited because I thought I'd become instantly famous. I thought I would start dating Angelina Jolie, and I was ready for this. And my publicist at the time, she emailed me and she said, "Matt, I'm so excited about this opportunity for you. The Albany Museum, which just was newly renovated, they would like you to come and be their very first speaker." And I was like, "That's great." and they gave me a train ticket, they set me up in a bed and breakfast. On my way on the train, I called my dad on my new cell phone. This was 2005. And I said, hey Dad, they're setting me up in this bed and breakfast. There's a TV in there, so I didn't have a TV at the time. I was like, I think I'm going to become big time. And he was like, that's great, Dad. So I get there. The next morning, they pulled me into the museum. They gave me a behind-the-scenes tour of the 9/11 exhibit, so it was pretty powerful. And it was just me. It was a beautiful museum. It was really renovated. And it was an incredible experience. Then they took me to the green room of this brand new auditorium. And I looked at it, and it was beautiful. It was like leveled up. I checked the mic, I was like, check 1, 2, my first ever event. I went into the green room, and they had juice there, orange juice. I drank the juice, and I waited for the event. And it was about 6:30, and my event started at 7. And I was kind of nervous and antsy, so every 5 minutes I would go peek my head into the auditorium to see if people, were showing up. 6:45, I peeked my head up, nobody was in the auditorium. 6:50, nobody, and I was like, okay, these people like to roll it late. Okay, I see how this. 6:55, nobody. 7, nobody. 7:10, 7:15, not one soul showed up. I was feeling a little deflated, so all I did is just continue to drink the orange juice. And the curator of the museum he felt really bad. He was sweating and stuff, and he's like, I don't know what's going on, I don't know where people are. Maybe it's because it's St. Patty's Day, I don't know. And then he said, but I heard that, I just received word that there are Boy Scouts sleeping on the 4th floor, they're doing a sleepover. He goes, I'll go get them. And I was like, no, it's okay, I'll just go back and watch the TV. I don't have TV, I'll just watch it. And he said, no, I'm going to go get them. So he went upstairs, he talked to the guy, he came back 15 minutes later, and he looked at me and he goes, I'm sorry, Matt, but the leader has politely declined. And I had to call my dad and tell him that I was not a good time. So the fact that you guys are all here, I don't care if you're getting extra credit, it doesn't matter. Thank you so much for being here. So I wanted to take you guys through a couple of things. I'm going to briefly touch on my childhood, and then I'm going to get into the UOP days a little bit, and then I'm going to turn it over to my dad. So I was born in National City, went to high school in a place called North County, Carter by the Sea in particular. And when I grew up, I never really thought much about college. It was sort of a pie in the sky kind of thing until I got pretty good at basketball, and I started to pair the possibility of becoming a college athlete, getting a free education, and school. But I will be honest, when I was really young, I wasn't into education. I had a very, very amazing mother who never let me miss a day of school. And she also said, Matt, you have to get a 3.0, and if you get a 3.0, I will never bother you about homework or playing basketball too much. So I got a 3.0. If I was ever flirting with a 3.1, I would miss a test on purpose. No, not really, but I just was very much about doing the bare minimum. And my focus was getting a college basketball scholarship. That was my dream. So I had a very interesting route to UOP. By the way, I've only spoken about this one time in my life, but my dream of my life was to play Division I college basketball. However, when I got out of high school, the school that I thought I was going to go to, USD, pulled the scholarship idea out from under me after I was done with school. So I went to a place called Hawaii Pacific. I got a basketball scholarship there, and I played 1 year there. I decided that I was too far away from home, and I ended up transferring to another school, a junior college. And from the junior college, I attracted the attention of the University of the Pacific, and finally it was my dream come true. This is the crazy part about this story, is that when I was young, all through high school, I maybe read one book from cover to cover. So I was just kind of a non-reader, or what I call a reluctant reader, and really my full ambition was on a sport. So I got to UOP, it was my dream. I quickly realized that I wasn't going to play beyond the University of the Pacific. The truth is, I wasn't good enough. I could tell right away that my ceiling was college basketball. I remember one game in particular, we played against Steve Nash, and I don't know if anybody in here knows who he is, but this was one of the games that I actually started the game. And I guarded Steve Nash. And I remember seeing him in person for the first time, and I read these articles about him going to the NBA. And we matched up head-to-head because he was a point guard. And we won the game, which was fantastic. But after the game, I went to the stat sheet, like most basketball players do, to see how I did against the guy I was guarding. He had 34 points and 14 assists. I was guarding him. And I had 3 points and 1 assist and 7 turnovers. And I never started again. So it was one of those huge moments for me. And after the game, I remember thinking, well, I'm not going to play basketball beyond college. It's incredible that it's paying for my school, and I love the game, but what am I going to do for a living? And I want to go back to something that happened in high school that I didn't really think much of at the time. It was my junior year. At the end of the year, my teacher, her name is Miss Blizzard. I know that sounds like a script name, but that was her real name. And Miss Blizzard, she said she did probably one of the most incredible things anybody's ever done for me. And like I said, at the time, I didn't know what it meant. So we were all getting to the final. This was our English final for junior year. Everybody got the test except me. And I remember thinking, oh my gosh, what did I do wrong? You know, she wouldn't even give me the test. And I raised my hand and I was like, Miss Blizzard, I didn't get the test. And she goes, I know, just hold on 1 second. So she goes to her desk and she pulls something out of a drawer and she comes over to my desk and sets it on the table. Basically, it was 12 blank sheets of paper and I already had a pen. And she whispered in my ear, she said, I gave you an A on the test. All I want you to do in this 2-hour period is write whatever you want. And at the time, as a young guy and kind of a working class kid who wasn't sure how to deal with things like that, I remember thinking, this lady's weird, she's crazy, why is she doing this? I was like, who cares, I got an A. I'll just go with it. So I wrote this silly little story about this girl that I was dating in high school who was a foreign exchange student from France. She didn't speak English, I didn't speak French, but we would sit and eat lunch together. We were dating, I think we were dating. And we would just look at each other over lunch, and I wrote how it was the best relationship of my life. And I finished it after 2 hours, and I gave it to her, and she held me back, and she goes, hold on 1 second. And she waited until everybody cleared out, and she turned to me and she goes, you don't know this, but you are a great writer. And she goes, okay, go ahead. I took off, and I remember thinking, why would she say that? You know, like, why did she say that about me? But then again, when I was young, I said, forget about it, who cares, I got an A. I didn't think about her again until I was here, and I was trying to think what I was going to do now that I wasn't going to be a basketball player. And I thought to myself, Miss Blizzard thinks I could be a good writer. So I actually said to myself, maybe I could become a poet. Now, I was writing all through high school a lot of stuff that was kind of secret. It was under the journals. I never told anybody, but I was writing a lot of spoken word style poetry, hip hop style poetry. And then I walked through the English department my junior year, and I saw this flyer. Have you guys ever heard of the Hanson Award? Yes. It's this writing award that's kind of incredible. It's a $2,000 award for the top prize. The best writing of the year. I saw the flyer, and it had about 10 of those little, you know how they cut the ends, so there were 10 things that you could pull off, right? I ripped off the whole thing. I was like, you know what, nobody else knows about this. The truth is, I turned my work in. It was the first time I ever gave my work to anybody. And 2 months later, I got this call that I won this Hanson Award. Which, by the way, one of the professors that was the judge is here today. Her name is Camille Norton. So I feel and it just so happens that I have one of the pieces that was part of that. entry. So do you guys are you just by the way? There are a lot of things I would change, so don't judge me, right? Okay, it's called Manuel. And the reason that I'm reading this to you is because it's very pertinent to what I do now. Manuel. Another Tuesday creeping, sitting in the house of healing. He's the thick, chewed-up beard, hair meeting in a ponytail. They say he's crazy, hears voices that aren't really there. Got no clue what he's saying half the time. And I suppose it's true. I watched him talk to nobody, seeing his stare confused, mind uncertain. I feel like I got them naive eyes staring into his, don't know why. Maybe because of how he looks, like my pops back home, like my uncles and all their buddies. He gets to talking about buying a Harley, about a dream with a boat made of plastic, about how he knows Carol and Erica and Juanita. And I'm listening, ain't hearing though. Doesn't make any sense in my ears. But I'm looking right into his eyes, sending respect, smiling only when it seems right, laughing after he does. Because in his eyes is my family, and I've never crossed them. But I worked at a schizophrenic home. Hey, are you Mexicano? Yeah, how'd you know that? I don't know, I could barely tell. What's your last name? De La Pena. Oh, you got a cool last name like me. Are you related to Sheena Easton? Maybe my friend Rico? And he's rambling, feeling a bond, talking in Spanish to exclude the others. Speaking it slow, the only way I can hear. And I catch enough words to fake know the shit. And I'm sitting in guilt. Ought to know my family's tongue. Everybody wants that. I have to change this. Ought to be how they are. But I think I'm Mr. Smart Boy, first to see a college campus, getting all educated. And it's like I'm sitting up in this place thinking I'm better or something. I don't know shit about the culture. Don't even eat grandma's tamales. I wonder how they look at me, Mr. Smart Boy. And Manuel asked if we're friends, if we could tell each other anything, like his sister and Karma. And of course he can. He could talk about his summer home on Mars, or his partner in La Bamba. He could talk about anything, however long, and I'm not going to say a word, because he's my father. He's my uncles and all their buddies. He's my grandma's tamales steaming hot out in the oven. He's the Spanish tongue and culture surrounding me growing, and he's everything I ever wanted to be. So that's sort of my handsome word thing. The interesting thing about that is today I'm writing the same exact stuff. So when I went to graduate school after UOP, and I studied creative writing. And it's funny because the first thing I started to write were stories about growing up mixed race and how I felt guilty as a young guy about not being Mexican enough. And so it was very complex things that I started to think about while I was here. Okay, I want to also take you through a little bit about my dad, because I ended up choosing San Diego State to go to graduate school because things were a little rocky back home with my family. And my dad, who actually worked at the San Diego Zoo for a long time, he had a high school education, but that was it. And what happened is a new regime came into the zoo and said, if you work within a certain proximity to animals, you have to have an animal science master's degree. So even though he had worked there 25 years, he had worked his way up to where he was cleaning the tiger enclosures. His job was pulled from it. And I think it was the first time that he sort of lost his identity. So I moved back home to study there, and I started to hand my dad books. He would ask me, like, what are you reading? And I would give it to him. And I really had not seen my dad read that much before that. So it was kind of an interesting thing. And my dad would read every book I would give him. The first book I ever gave him was 100 Years of Solitude. So he ended up becoming more of a reader. And I just want to leave off my portion before I hand off the mic to him. And I'll say that I moved to New York. My parents moved to Santa Cruz. And one day I got a call from my mom. And she goes, Matt, I don't know where your dad is. He's not coming home really late on a weekday. you gotta understand, to have an affair, you have to speak to other human beings. But here's what it turns out he was really doing.
There was a young couple living in Tijuana, Mexico. He was a hard-working, honest man,
Closer to the mic.
well into his 20s. She was younger, mid-teens, beautiful. After a short time, they married. For her, their marriage was a way out of extreme poverty. He hoped that over time she might love him. Time went on, and through hard work, he reached a position where men below him did the hardest work. He was able to buy 2 houses. When I say houses, these may not be what you might imagine, but they were not shacks either. More time passed, and first one son was born, and then another. It was during this time that the young wife, now mother, wanted more. When her husband would come home from work, and after dinner sit in his favorite chair reading his newspaper, she would start in. She said she wanted to move across the border to the United States, that things would be better there. The husband, now father, argued that because he could not speak English, he would be forced to become a laborer again. As time went on, she was able to get her way. The young family moved into a small house on the U.S. side of the border. The father went back to working hard. More time passed, and another son was born. From time to time, the 3 boys would hear the parents argue over money. There was never enough. One day after dinner, while the father was sitting in his favorite chair, reading his newspaper, she started in on him again. This particular time, this usually quiet man had had enough. He picked up the small lamp and smashed it onto the small table it had been sitting on. The father left the house and went out into the garage. He did not come back into the house that night. The garage was not so much a garage as it was a large shed. The father continued to stay in the garage from then on, only coming into the house to eat his dinner, which was left for him on the stove each night. After eating their own dinner, the 3 boys and their mother would leave the kitchen and go into the living room pretending to watch TV. They would really be listening for their father to come into the house to eat. The father would eat alone and then go back to the garage. This continued like this for a while. After some time, the mother once again confronted the father, this time in the kitchen. The mother said that things could not continue this way. The father called the oldest boy into the kitchen and on one knee said to his son, ¿Quieres que me vaya o quieres que me quede? This is a story I tell from time to time in the elementary school classes I teach, where the students are almost all Hispanic, and from time to time, I'm sure they have heard arguments over a lack of money. It is at this point in the story that I stop and I ask, what do you think the oldest son said to his father? Did he tell his father to go or to stay? After listening to what my students think, I tell them that this was just an 8-year-old boy. He couldn't say go. He couldn't say stay. All he could do was cry and watch as his father piled all his clothes into the trunk of the old car and drove away. Shortly after leaving the zoo, my wife and I sold everything and moved from the city where we grew up and raised our 3 children. Matt said, Dad, check out Santa Cruz. I think you'll like it. Matt's mom had just earned her teaching credential in San Diego. After settling into Santa Cruz, she accepted a teaching position in Watsonville, and I began remedial classes at Cabrillo College. I was scared. It had been so long since I had been a student, and while I graduated high school, my attendance record was poor. At Cabrillo, I knew that I would be much older than the average student, and I had very little experience using a computer, but I figured life experience would count for something. Up to that point, I had all the successes and failures associated with growing up in the 60s and 70s. When we started our family, while still in our teens, I worked piecework in a factory. After 6 years, I left the factory. It was closing down, and began an entry-level position at the zoo. I eventually worked my way to become the lead tiger keeper. I fed and cared for the animals in one area. Besides cleaning up after these animals and maintaining exhibits, I was expected to educate the visitors. I gave behind-the-scenes tours to groups that range from zoo members to school groups to celebrities. The celebrities were brought to my area behind large bamboo-covered gates by a tour guide. Billy Joel offered to shake my hand, but I declined, telling him I wasn't sure what was on my hand at that moment. Pamela Anderson was so pretty up close. Tommy Lee was shorter than I thought he would be. Bruce Springsteen was very quiet. Tom Clancy lit up a cigarette in the enclosed tiger bedroom area. I met many actors, some nice, some not so much. I was embarrassed for General Norman Schwarzkopf. Here was a guy who had sent so many young people into battle, and his hand and handshake were so soft. Of all the behind-the-scene tours I led, I was uneasy only twice. Walt Disney's grandson, he looked just like Walt. And Dennis Hopper, the actor, he was very cool. One of the most exciting things I did for the zoo was to escort 2 white tigers to a zoo in Spain. I flew first class while they traveled in metal-lined crates in the baggage compartment. I thought these what I considered to be unique experiences might count for something at Cabrillo College. They didn't. In a beginner's computer class, I watched as the other old guys slowly stopped attending. I heard one guy say that his fingers were too big for the keys on the keypad. When I failed my first essay exam in an American history class, I remember riding my bicycle home after class thinking, am I retarded? I remember kind of hoping that I would get hit by a big truck. Luckily, I think, I have this compulsive behavior that makes it easier for me to keep going than it would be for me to stop. So I kept going to school, but I never spoke to anyone. I didn't want to be seen as that creepy old guy. I didn't want anyone to know that I wasn't familiar with material that younger students might already know. So I hid behind books. During breaks, I was the guy always reading. I was reading everything that mapped through my way. Bellow, Roth, Somerset Maugham, Kundera, Dennis Johnson, Cormac McCarthy, Last Exit to Brooklyn, A Confederacy of Dunces. All the time, I was hiding. But I was never late, and I never missed a class. After graduating from Cabrillo because of a TAG program, I was accepted as an English lit major at the University of California at Santa Cruz, where I was exposed to South African lit, African American lit, classical Chinese lit, Asian philosophy, Naylor, Virgil, Jared Diamond, Milton, Singer, Hess, Whitman, Twain, Susak, Swift, Morrison, Hawthorne, Shakespeare, Sartre, Hurston, Mann, Castaneda. And though I still didn't talk, I did listen, listening to the brilliant students and celebrated professors with something I would never forget. For the last 7 years, I've been a teacher at an elementary school in Watsonville that my wife works at. Sometimes I'm in class for just a day as a substitute, sometimes for long term. I have been teaching a first grade class since the beginning of this school year. I tell these students, the kindergartners often call me Mr. Jalapeno, and I don't correct them. I tell these students that outside of school, I really don't talk much. Even in this elementary school setting, I love to listen. And the stories these students could tell. There's this one student, Edwin, whose father was the last parent to arrive at back to school night this year, just as the last of the parents was leaving. Edwin's father, a migrant farmer, walked around looking at the things on the walls in the classroom. He said to me in his broken English, "Teacher, please take care of his son." When I shook his hand as he left, I was embarrassed at how soft my hand must have felt. I love it when I see past students who have gone on to junior high school or high school. They will come up to me while picking up their younger siblings and ask me if they were my favorite. These are always the students who were usually the biggest pains, and they usually were my favorites. I remember them because they were readers, and like Matt did for me, I give them books. I have passed out Wonder, Inside Out and Back Again. Everybody sees the ants, even Animal Farm and The Old Man and the Sea. But most of all, I love when I can put one of Matt's books in their hands. Thank you very much.
and the evolution of sort of my ideology, where I'm coming from as a writer. My one rule I made for myself when I graduated UOP is I said I will never, ever, for as long as I live, write a book about basketball. Because I did not want basketball to define me. I made it 2 weeks before I started a book called Waldo Line. It was about basketball. And the one thing that I was fascinated with in terms of that book is I love the culture of pickup basketball. I'm always referred to by people around the country as a Hispanic author, as somebody who writes class, that writes about race. But the truth is, one of the most important things that I explore in my books is class. And picture this. When I grew up playing in a pickup gym, the thing that fascinated me was this. Inside the dark gym, there was a unique and temporary class system that was erected. So the best player in the gym became the preacher. He became the CEO. He was the doctor. He was the guy that got all the attention and the props. And when it was game point, people would give him the ball and clear out and let him do his thing. He had all the power in that context. But the fascinating thing is, when I was a young kid watching this, I was about 15, at this real great gym in San Diego called Union Gym. I watched that guy walk out of the dark gym and into the bright world that waited for him, where all his power was stripped away from him, and he was a nobody. Richard Rodriguez has a great line. He was a kid looking out over in the fields, and he saw these powerful men, no shirts on, muscles wriggling, right, working in the fields, and he described them using this paradox. They were powerful, powerless men. And so those are some of the things that I started to explore with Waldo Line. My second book, I kind of went back to this thing that I was doing at UOP, really looking at race and especially what it means to be mixed. And I want to read you just a quick passage from Mexican White Boy, and you'll see how much it relates to Manuel. Danny's so lucky he still has his dad's family, the Lopez's. Throughout all the moving around they did after his dad left, the different towns and high schools and apartment complexes, Danny's relatives made sure his mom still dropped him and his sis off in National City for Thanksgiving and Mother's Day and every other Christmas, where all the tios and tias and cousins were cracking on each other and playing horseshoes in the dirt alley behind the house and eating baby empanadas and toothpicks up chorizo bites off plastic trays, where they're drinking homemade horchata and Pacifico and Bud Light and tequila with lime, always tequila. And since their snaps are a random mix of both Spanish and English, Danny gets only half of every joke. Not enough to laugh, but he laughs anyway. He points at whoever's currently taking the heat, puts a fist to his mouth, and says in his head, "Oh, damn, that's cold." He slaps Uncle Ray's hand and laughs some more, but they know he doesn't quite have the whole picture, and he knows they know. This is why he feels as out of place as his grandma's as at his private school. And when his grandma passes, by the way, I don't know if anybody has grandmas that make tortillas. You'll get this on a secondary level. And when his grandma passes out homemade tortillas hot off the griddle, she does it based on family ranking. It's a subtle and unspoken ranking system, but one each and every person in the house understands. And because he's so guapo and gets such good grades and lives in such a better neighborhood these days, and because in a weird way Grandma doesn't know how she feels about being Mexican, he's always the first to eat, even before his uncles or his dad when he was still around. And sure, that's when it seems like he belongs, but it's more complicated than that. His uncles and cousins may smile and nod and even crack on him some. D-man, little D, D-money. Roll it up right, man, fold it at the end. Here, do it like this, homie, with your fingers. Don't hold it like no white boy now, or else the butter's going to drip right out the bottom. Get all over your hand. But all Danny wants to do is give that first tortilla right back to his grams. Hold off until the next round. Have her offer that first one up to his dad instead, or Uncle Ray, or Sophia, or Veronica. He just assumed wait till everybody in the house had one in hand before he did. That's when he wishes he didn't get such good grades. When he wishes he lived even closer to the border than they did. in a one-room shack in the worst barn in this side of Tijuana. Dirt floors and no running water. When he wishes he got in more trouble at school, maybe a suspension on his record for fighting or bringing a switchblade to class. Maybe he could cuss out one of his private school teachers in the hall during lunch. Because the very thing Grandma gushes over are the things that shame him the most. Such a good little boy, such a pretty boy. Look at him doing all his homework before bed, studying for that big English midterm, taking out the trash without even being asked. If it came down to a choice, it wouldn't be a choice. That top-tier tortilla, the butter running all down his fingers now, down his arm, nah, to be a real Lopez. That's what he picked. Chip off the old block, one of the cousins from the barrio. Things aren't always as they appear. And then this is the last little section I'm reading. And what's interesting is the way they all genuinely wanted to succeed, to rise above the family history, be the first Lopez to go to college, come back one Mother's Day as a doctor, or a lawyer, or a dentist, a wealthy businessman. Hey, Grams. Or, hey, look, everybody, he's Professor Lopez. Look at him, Grams. He's pulling up in a brand new Lexus. But at the same time, he bets they subconsciously resent him, too. He's almost sure of it. Alabama. And I said, is anybody in here mixed like me? They were just shot up their hands, and they were owning it. And actually, this kid said, look at this sweatshirt I'm wearing. A bunch of us got together and we made these sweatshirts, and it said on the sweatshirt, Team Hybrid. So people today are totally owning this in a new way. And it just so happens I got caught up in this wave. And so my books all feature mixed race characters. And to me, it's incredibly powerful for these kids to see themselves in books. Junot Díaz, a writer that I greatly admire, I heard him speak one time, and he said, apparently when he was young, he was really into comic books. And he said, I noticed a trope when I was young that the monster in the story couldn't see themselves in a mirror. It was just sort of a comic book trope. And he said, the quickest way to create monsters in our inner cities is to never show those kids a reflection of themselves in literature. And that kind of hit home, and I thought, I'm so happy that I'm doing this. But here's an interesting thing that's happened to me recently. So I've been doing that for 8 years, writing books about kids growing up on the quote-unquote wrong side of the tracks. But then I was fortunate enough to be one of the judges for the National Book Award. And so we read 320 books and tried to pick out the best book of the year. Actually, I forgot my little iPad. And I came across one book. It was called Inside Out and Back Again. My dad mentioned it. And I want to read one very important section. It's a book in verse. So it's a book in verse and there are little titles. So this title is called Black and White and Yellow and Red. The bell rings. Everyone stands. I stand. Just a little context. The main character is from Vietnam. She leaves wartime Vietnam and lands in Alabama. They line up. So do I. Down the hall, turn left, take a tray, receive food, sit. On one side of the bright, noisy room, light skin. Other side, dark skin. Both laughing, chewing, as if it never occurred to them someone medium would show up. I don't know where to sit any more than I know how to eat the pink sausage snuggled inside bread, shaped like a corn cob, smeared with sauces, yellow and red. I think they are making fun of the Vietnamese flag, until I remember no one here likely knows that flag's colors. I put down the tray and wait in the hallway. The reason why this had a big impact on me is because at first I thought, the way I've been thinking for the past 8 years, I thought, how cool would it be if that girl got to read a book about herself, featuring a character like her? But then I actually started to think differently as I kind of ruminated on this book. And I thought, it's actually as important, if not more important, for the kids in that school before she arrived to read a book featuring a character like her so that they'd be a little bit more aware of who she is and her contextual situation when she arrives. So now my big goal and my big mission is to have books that feature diverse characters put into private schools, to put into suburban schools, because my dream is to have a kid on the subway from the rough school see a kid from the private school in a uniform reading a book featuring a kid that looks like him. I think that's so incredibly validating. So that's kind of my new mission, and my newest book is sort of my subversive attempt to do this, because I've been writing a lot of books that take place on the wrong side of the tracks. They're set in the neighborhoods where these kids are from, and I thought, okay, I'm going to pull those characters out and put them in a different context, a more commercial context. So my newest book is called The Living, and it takes place on a cruise ship. And I'm not going to read from it, but I'll just tell you that it's kind of more of a disaster novel, and my goal is actually coming true. It's been nominated in a lot of states that don't have heavy Hispanic populations, so now it's being taught in private schools, in suburban schools, and I think this is what I've been trying to do for the last couple of years. So that's my new movement as a writer. So thank you guys for listening to us, and now we wanted to turn it to you, and if you guys have any questions for us about the books or anything that we've talked about today. Unless you guys are sitting. Anybody have any questions?
Earlier today you mentioned that you really liked The House on Mango Street.
Yeah.
I was wondering, what was your favorite part in that book?
Well, that's funny that you asked, because there's a section called Darius in the Clouds. I don't know if you remember this, but one of my favorite things is when I read this section, it's called Darius in the Clouds, and it basically gives the most profound piece of poetry in the little vignette to the scrubby kid, the kid that is the kind of guy who chases girls with a stick that's touched a rat. You know, like he's that kind of kid. And he looks up at the clouds, and he goes, "You guys see that?" And it's this kid who normally never talks. And they're like, "Yeah, what about it?" And he's like, "That's God." And it's just a cloud, right? It's a popcorn-looking piece of cloud. And he says, and they're like, "What?" And he goes, "That's God." And he made it simple. And so that was a huge moment for me, because I thought, I love this Sandro Cisneros gave this scrubby kid poetry. And so I tried to do that too. So Darius in the Clouds. Any other questions?
What has been your biggest challenges, like from the beginning of your career until now? Have they lessened? Have they gotten bigger? What?
I'd say that one of the biggest challenges, she asked one of the biggest challenges in my career from beginning to end. One of the hardest things is getting publishers to believe that a book featuring a diverse character can be a commercial success. That's really difficult, and right now there's a huge push for having more diversity in children's literature, because there's very, very little of it. And the hardest thing is for young Hispanic writers, young African American writers, to get their foot in the door, because a lot of times the publisher has one Hispanic author, and they think they've got it covered. We've got our Hispanic author. We've got our African American author. So it's very difficult for the new generation to come in and put their foot in that world. So that's probably the most challenging part, is getting a publisher to view a book with a diverse character as a possible commercial success. Anybody else? Sir?
How did you get started? Did you go the traditional route of finding an agent and then having them shop it around?
I did. I heard that getting an agent was really hard. And so what I did is I went to Barnes & Noble, and I heard that there's a book called Guide to Literary Agents, right? And so I pulled this book off the shelf, and I said, I'm going to try to find 10 agents that I would send my work to. I found them in the book, and I was like, okay, I got 10 here that would work. And then I was going to the cash register, and I realized that the book cost almost $40, and I'm at $23. So I went into a dark corner of Barnes & Noble, and I looked over my shoulder, and I pulled out those sheets like I wrote them out. It's very sad, don't do this, I don't encourage you, but I kind of did. And then I got an agent, and my agent gave me the best advice possible. He fingers. And I was like, what do you mean? He goes, it makes it harder to type. In other words, now that he's doing his job, my job is to write the next book. And so I always tell people it's really, really hard to get the first book in to get that first contract. But once you do, then you have a little bit of space in publishing, and hopefully you can build within. But yeah, you kind of go the traditional agent, big five publisher.
Yeah, maybe more for you, Dad.
Sure.
What do you do as a teacher when you have kids that just plain don't read? And I'm asking kind of for him because he's a high school teacher.
Well, I've been lucky that Matt's been like my personal librarian. And I just kind of funnel the stuff that he recommends to me to them, because he actually recommends a lot of YA stuff. And when I give books to students, it's normally the older students, not the elementary school kids. So that's pretty much where I get the ideas from.
And the one thing I would add to that is I go to a lot of teachers' conferences, and one of the things that we talk about as authors is finding entry points for the reluctant reader. So, one of the things that a really savvy teacher can do is find that entry point. So this kid, he hates to read, but he kind of loves soccer. And well, here's a book that features a kid who's playing on the soccer team. And then that part of the book feels natural for the kid. So now they're going to possibly enter the book. And once you get a kid to enter the book, you can take them anywhere. So then a book can take you to what is literature to me, But if that entry point isn't there, it's going to be hard for them to penetrate. Any other questions? Yeah.
I have two questions. The first is, are you aware of organizations or small publishing houses that are sort of actively looking to promote?
Yeah, actually there's one that does a great job called Lee and Lowe. They do an incredible job of seeking diverse authors, and I think that's all they publish. So Lee and Lowe does a great job. And yes, Cinco Puntos Press does a great job for Hispanic authors. We were talking at dinner about Benjamin Elier Saenz, who's a Mexican-American writer, who's a good friend of mine. And he publishes a lot of his books there. So some in the Big Five and some with Cinco Puntos. So yeah, there's some great publishers who do that. I guess our big thing is we're really fighting for the Big Five to be more open to diversity because they have so much power. And you got a second one?
Would you write or think about maybe writing for a slightly younger audience? Say the 4th, 5th, and 6th graders?
Well, it's funny that you asked. I actually have two picture books. One of them comes out in January. It's called House Up on Market Street. And I have this little tiny baby in my house now. Her name is Luna. I just had a daughter. And so it makes me want to do even more because watching your little child fall in love with the book is so powerful. It makes me just love those people who write picture books. So I have two, and I want to do more for sure. Yes, sir.
Are books outside your only books, or is there any more?
There are two picture books that I don't think they have. But I believe there's Barnes & Noble here in the stock. You should check it out. Also, there's a series that I kind of helped with called the Infinity Ring series, which is for 6th graders. I don't know where you're in, but it's for people around that age, so that could be a possible thing to check out. Yeah.
I just went to Barnes & Noble. They don't have your books in stock, but they'll order them for you. They have one that's the Christmas one with the kids ice skating.
Oh yeah, so it's part of a collection. Yeah, that's called My True Love Gave to Me.
And for your picture books, did you draw pictures?
No, I am the worst artist in the world. What happens there is my agent has a lot of clients who write picture books or who are illustrators. And so my agent is like a matchmaker sometimes with a picture book. So he matched me up with two different African American illustrators. One's name is Kadir Nelson, and he did the book called The Nation's Hope. And the newest one is illustrated by this guy named Christian Robinson, who's an incredible illustrator from Oakland, California.
What's the heading?
That's called Last Stop on Market Street. Hey, we'll take a couple more questions because I don't want to keep you guys here all night yet.
Do you ever
My first book was made into a movie. It was called Fall Out Live, and my dad was in it. He was the custodian in the basketball game. Actually, it's funny because the book the movie version of Fall Out Live has Nick Cannon, Ludacris, Rosanna, and Melissa Leo, has some good people, and I have my dad. And I actually wrote into the contract that he had to be in the movie. And my dad had a trailer. His name was actually Noah. So he had a trailer with his character name, and I remember we went to the set that day, and my dad goes, "Matt, can I borrow your phone?" And I was like, "Okay." I was like, "Who are you going to call?" And he goes, because I was like, "My dad doesn't call him." So he actually called my sisters, right? And then the funniest thing about the whole day of shooting, because we were there for 16 hours for one scene, which is, by the way, why, it's great to have your book made into a movie, but going to the set is like exciting for 25 minutes, and then it's like the most boring thing in the world. But he was a custodian, and the director came over and put tape down on the court, on the side of the court, and said, "These are your marks. So whenever we cut, come back to these marks." So we did a bunch of, takes, and my dad was to do his thing, wheel the cart, and then he'd come back at his spot. In the middle of the day, the director said, "Okay, everybody, let's break for lunch." Everybody, like all the extras that were in the gym, they took off to the craft service table and were eating sandwiches and stuff, and me and my mom, who was in the crowd, and my wife, who was just a girlfriend at the time, we were cruising out, and I looked back, and my dad was still standing there on his marks, holding him up. And I was like, "Dad, we could go to lunch, we come back," and he's like, "No, I'll just stay here." He goes, "Give me a granola." You don't want to mess up the mood, so that was very fun. There's a lot of talk about The Living from Sony Pictures. And that would be the first time I ever had a book made into a major movie. So the sequel comes out, it's only 2 books, but the sequel comes out in May. And they're kind of waiting to see what the content is, and hopefully that will work out. It'll be amazing. Yes?
So you mentioned you started out writing poetry?
Yes.
And I wondered if you were interested in continuing writing a novel in verse, or if that's
So
interesting.
she asked me if I'm interested in writing a novel in verse because I started in poetry. I will tell you this, I'm actually a better prose writer than a poet. When I look back at my poetry, I realize that I'm kind of writing prose. I'm just doing arbitrary line breaks. So I don't think I'm a good enough poet to carry a novel. Although I do, like I read from Inside Out and Back Again, I really, really admire people who can write with such economy of language. And as a prose writer, I think the most important thing you can do is read poetry. So I read a lot of poetry, I just don't know if I can write it. Yes, sir.
Senor Jalapeno. I'm wondering, with the Common Core curriculum coming into the schools, we know a lot about the power of personal writing and students reading their own writings and so on. Do you think there's going to be enough room and flexibility in that kind of a curriculum for that kind of reading and writing?
I'll tell you from experience that the teachers I work with, the Common Core is driving some of them crazy. But actually, there are parts of it that if the students can buy in, it will work. So to answer your question, time will tell.
That was a tough question. Maybe one more question. Anybody have the last question of the day? Yes, sir.
Who are some of your favorite diverse authors?
Junot Díaz is sort of one of the people I look up to as an author. I remember I was in graduate school and I was exposed to this book called Drown, which is a collection of short stories. He's a Dominican writer. And when I read that, I thought to myself, oh my God, we can get this stuff published? Because it was very similar to the writing I was doing at UOP and when I was at San Diego State. So he was a huge, kind of like a guy that I looked up to. Sandra Cisneros is a big deal to me. Actually, I just found out that Jackie Woodson, who's an African-American writer, and she's actually my neighbor in Brooklyn, she just won the National Book Award about 30 minutes ago, so that's pretty amazing. That's actually amazing because a writer of color won the National Book Award. That's just incredible. I really admire her work. Then, science that I talked about earlier. Ruth Foreman was a huge influence on me as a young writer. She's a poet out of Oakland. I read her when I was in graduate school. So yeah, those are some of the people that are off the top of the head. So thank you guys so much for listening to us. That's the first time I've ever spoken with my dad.